Hey you guys, Miss Endicott here. So last week we asked you to compile some questions for a dietitian. And so with COVID going on, we felt like it might be a little bit tough to get a dietitian to give some answers to the questions. However, I am lucky enough to have a dietitian as a mom. So I would like to introduce you to my mom. Her name is Diana Endicott. Do you mind coming in?
Oh, sure.
This is my mom. She has volunteered to help us out today, and that is awesome.
Hi, everyone. As Claire said, I'm her mom, but right now I've got my dietitian hat on, so I'm Dietitian Di, is a lot of people call me that. But I also just want to show you the mug that I'm drinking my coffee from. It's called mum@stressedout.com because there's a lot of people home right now because of COVID. But anyway, so let's begin. I think just the one comment I want to make before we start is that the questions were amazing. And I was just really impressed by the variety of the questions and also the types of questions that were asked. I thought they were very thoughtful, and I'm going to do my best in terms of answering those questions. I wanted to let you know that yes, I'm a dietitian, but I'm not an expert in all areas. So I did my best in terms of sort of researching what I felt I needed to research. But if there's ever any questions, any further questions, I would suggest that you either take them to your doctor, or a lot of doctors work with dietitians, and perhaps at your family health team and such, where if you need some more information on that particular subject. So, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So our first category is about the job. So the first question was, are you a dietitian or a nutritionist, and what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a dietitian is a regulated profession, and the actual term is a regulated title. Basically, what that means is that dietitians, like a lot of other health professionals, are controlled and regulated by the government. So to become a dietitian, there is a set of academic requirements that are necessary to get that title. So, for example, to be a dietitian, there's an undergrad in nutrition. Then you do, the next step would either be a master's or an internship program. And then you write an exam with the college, and then you get your title of the registered dietitian. And so that's the process that's required. At that stage, we are part of a college, so the College of Dietitians of Ontario, just like there's a College of Doctors of Ontario, nurses, speech pathologists, and that college is protecting the public. So, for example, if Miss Endicott gets some information from a dietitian, and there's something that she's not happy with, she can then turn to the college, and then the college will deal with that issue, and myself, let's say if I was the dietitian that gave that information. So that's going to be protecting the public. So that's a dietitian, a registered dietitian, and the initials are RD in Ontario. Nutritionists are not a regulated profession or a regulated title. So basically anybody can be a anybody can be a nutritionist. So Miss Endicott could say she's a teacher/nutritionist. And so so she could then give nutrition advice. And if it's something that's incorrect or causes some harm, the person who receives that information has no way to then put in grievances and try to follow up with that. So that's the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist.
So awesome. Question 2. Do you create meal plans and activity plans for your patients, or only meal plans?
Yeah, another really good question. So when I see a patient, what happens is the first thing I do is I assess the patient, and I assess them using whatever information I have. Generally, it's things like anthropometrics, which means their height, their weight, what weight history. It includes lab results. It includes their medical history, any other diet that they might be on. So I take all those pieces of information and put that together, sort of like a puzzle, and then come up with a nutrition assessment in terms of where they are now and what they require. After that, I then sort of follow through with that assessment and then do what's necessary next. So whether that's education for that patient and or family, and or perhaps if I'm working in with a patient that's, say, in the hospital, it might be ordering something like a tube feed or sort of feeding intravenously, and then I follow up accordingly. Going back to the question about meal plans, yes, that is a part of generally the education. So for my patients that I see, a lot of times during the education part, I will provide them with a meal plan outlining what they need to follow in terms of, how many servings of a particular food or what kind of foods that we're trying to stay away from or encouraging more of. So that is a meal plan. And so, yes, that is part of my job, but certainly doesn't encompass all of it. I sometimes talk about activity with my patients too, but not very much. I certainly am not qualified like a therapist would be, but with any kind of activity, as you all know, is of benefit, and certainly to the population that I work with, it is very helpful as tolerated.
Okay, question 3. What type of information do you need to know about your patient to form your meal plan for that person?
Yeah, so this is, I think I sort of touched on this beforehand or at my last answer. So I deal with just the adult population, and I don't know if I mentioned this already, but so my wheelhouse, or the patients that I work with, are those who have kidney disease. So I am a dietitian that works in the renal program, renal being the medical term for kidneys. So when I work with those particular patients, I gather the information that's necessary to fulfill my assessment. So again, it would be their age, their where they are in terms of their disease, their kidney disease. Are there any other comorbid diseases, i.e., do they have potentially diabetes as well, hypertension? I mean, there's a vast array of different diseases that people can have. And then I also look at, as I mentioned, their labs, their medications, any previous education. All that is the information that I use, and then that helps me to formulate what I call my nutrition care plan. And that's what the information that I use.
Question 4. What if the person you are helping doesn't follow the meal plan that you came up for with that person?
Yeah, that is a great question. That made me smile when I read that question, because it happens. It absolutely happens. If any of you have ever followed any kind of diet recommendations, it can be very difficult. And for my patient population, their diet recommendations, depending on where they are in the spectrum of kidney disease, can be very difficult, arduous at times, hard to stick to. And I think as a dietitian, there's a couple things. I need to be empathetic, sympathetic in regards to what I'm asking them to do. I think the other thing is that knowing that I'm going to be following them, because a lot of these patients, I meet them at the early stages of kidney disease, and if their kidney disease progresses, I might follow them when they become end-stage kidney disease, possibly then maybe going on to dialysis, possibly transplant. So I follow them through the whole spectrum. So I have the privilege of developing a relationship with these wonderful people. And so it's my job to understand, like all of us, that we go through highs and lows. And during those difficult times, trying to figure out what is happening at that time. What's that barrier that's preventing them from adhering to that diet at that point? And seeing if I can give them some recommendations on how to get over that barrier. Sometimes we don't reach a solution, and so all I can do is give my suggestions and let them perhaps do what they need to do, and then maybe know that they can reach out to me at some point when they're ready, and then I can help them again. But it certainly is a big part of my job, is helping patients get over those difficult times.
Okay, so our next category is we're diving into general nutrition and diet questions. So do you want to chat a little bit about that just before I say the question?
Sure, yeah. I think one of the things I want to start off with is when I talk about diet in this part of the question answer period, I think for me, diet means what are you eating? What is it that you're eating at this time? I don't mean it to be restrictive. Basically, what it is what you're eating. What is it that you're eating, and what the recommendations would be for a particular situation. There's a lot of, and I guess why I'm saying this, there's a lot of issues, and rightfully so, about sort of body image and restriction of diet, of calories, and weight loss, and unhealthy behaviors and thoughts about diet. And that's not what I want to promote here by any means. It's very, very important. And you probably have learned some of this, and will learn it more if you continue on in an area of sort of health and say body and physiology, is that our body requires a lot of different nutrition, macro, micronutrients, to function every day. And if we start to restrict our diet in an unhealthy way, long term, that can really affect our health. So again, I just want to explain to you what I'm trying to promote here is good, sensible eating, and good healthy recommendations, but then also answering your questions, which are all very good questions, but understanding they're not diet recommendations per se. Okay,
so question 5. Do genetics have anything to do with weight or diet goals? And if so, how would you treat this person so they can feel better about themselves physically?
Yeah, another really excellent question. So, as you all know, there's an issue in North America in regards to overweight and obesity. And it's a really big public health concern because of the comorbidities, or the diseases that go along with that long term. Things like high cholesterol levels, or cardiac disease as a result, diabetes, mental health problems. So this is a big issue, a great question, and and it's looking at sort of why, what are the factors that cause this. So, like, generally speaking, very generally speaking, what overweight and obesity is, it's chronically taking in more energy or more calories than the body is burning off, is basically what's happening there. And it's, if we look at the environment first, in terms of North America, and when I'm when I'm talking about North America, because we're a developed country, and most of us are lucky enough to have an abundance of food available to us, and a lot of those foods tend to be high calorie, high energy, low nutrition foods that are so readily available. So driving through those drive-throughs, fast food, or going to the local corner store and getting sodas or pop and chips, and so readily available. And also, the pricing of these foods are generally lower, unfortunately, and we're able to afford those foods. So I think that's a big part in terms of the calories that we're taking in, excessive calories, and then also not meeting the energy needs that are required to keep our body weight at a good body weight, concerning those extra calories that we're taking in. So we're not burning off those calories that we're taking in because of what I just explained. So that's one part. But then we're looking at genetics, and this is a really interesting area. And I actually did, for this question, a little bit of research on it myself, just to see what's the most recent. And certainly what researchers have found is that there are several genes, I think they listed greater than 50 genes, that are potentially connected to obesity. But they haven't been able to find any strong relationships. So there's not one particular gene that says, yes, if you have this gene, that you are more predisposed to obesity. One of the things that I did come across was, studies that they did on multiple births, so children, twins or triplets, and they looked at those children if they were brought up in the same household versus if for whatever reason they were separated at birth. And this is where the genetic part comes in, because even if they were separated at birth and lived in different households, genetically what they found is that these children over time, as they became adults, they had very similar outcomes in terms of their weight. So this is, maybe I should have said that first, but that is certainly the strength behind the genetic part. So I guess what I want to say to you is that overweight, obesity, I believe is, and researchers do too, is multifactorial. That genetics, yes, absolutely, probably, yes, does play a part, but also the environment that we are brought up in or continue with as we become adults, in terms of food available and exercise, also play a really big part in terms of our overall health and weight. Okay.
Okay, question 6. Is it important to count calories? How many do we burn naturally? How many should we intake? And are there any apps to help you do this?
Okay, this is a 4-part question here. So, counting calories. There has been some studies done that about looking at patients who are wanting to lose weight, and the study is looking at the patients counting their calories. And the studies have shown that patients that count their calories actually do lose more weight over time than those people who don't. Now, again, I think you need to understand that these studies are probably, in terms of the length of the study, it might be 6 months, 8 months. So, and so they're looking at X number of participants, and then providing them with the information and the ability to count their calories, and then finding what the outcomes is of that. So that has shown that counting calories has led to a decreased weight over time. What researchers and I believe is happening here is that people, because they're counting calories, are starting to learn portion sizes. We in North America, again, have lost our concept of recognizing, or our ability to recognize, what a portion size is of food. When I do my teaching with my patients, a lot of times we'll talk. I have actually plastic food models that I show them, and I have measuring cups, and I'll show patients what 3 ounces of meat look like, or what a cup of pasta looks like. And a lot of patients are flabbergasted by this, because again, we really don't pay much attention to portion sizes. But what we recognize is that in a particular food, we don't need a lot of that particular food to get the macro and micronutrients that we require. So a lot of times we're overeating. So counting calories for those patients in those studies did result in weight loss, because all of a sudden they're saying, wow, perhaps a cup of pasta is really all I need versus the 2 cups or the 3 cups. The issue is long term. How do we do this and counting calories? Sometimes with my patients, I have directed them to using actually apps. The one that I tend to use the most is called MyFitnessPal, I think is what it's called.
MyFitnessPal, yeah.
MyFitnessPal,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and because I think when I look at it, and I used it myself just to make sure I knew how to use it and what it incorporated, and again, it's a tool that can be used short term or for say a month, and it's really quite easy to input your information. Certainly supports our technology now in terms of easy ways to scan the barcode. All the information comes up for you, and but again, it sets goals in terms of the amount of calories that you need for that particular day, and then it includes an activity component so that if you do more activity, it then changes the allotment of energy that you require for that day. I think it's a really great program, but because it teaches us how to control our intake, and then also then it looks at your micro and macronutrients to ensure that you're getting what your body requires to function now and as well as long term. I think one of the questions was, what are you looking for? Like, how much energy do we require? When I'm working with someone who's looking at needing to lose weight, what I do is I look at what they're currently eating. So I'll ask them to write down, say, a 3-day food record, and then I will analyze that. I will look at that for energy intake, protein. I'll look at, again, the macro micronutrients. And then for weight loss, what I generally do is I subtract about 500 to 600 calories from what they're eating now, so that they have a guide in terms of how many calories they're looking at, and then they can put that into their fitness app, or they can, if they're doing it on some other kind of program, that they have an idea of just how many calories they require. I think one of the important things, again, is that it's really, really difficult to get all the nutrition that you require if you're looking at a very low calorie intake, say, less than 1,500, less than 1,400 calories. It's hard to get your macro and micronutrients. And this is where if you're looking for help in regards to putting something together for you that's a healthy way of losing weight, I would suggest perhaps working with a dietitian. Again, that might be part of your family health team or someone that your family doctor that can direct you to, or there are the Dietitians of Canada have a website that is excellent as well, that can direct you to different dietitians in your community that can help as well. So it's I hope I answered the question. There's a lot of questions, but I think you have the general gist of just what the recommendations would be in terms of weight loss.
Okay, question number 7. How do you deal with unintentional weight loss?
Okay, interesting question. So again, in my practice, I do see a fair amount of cases of unintentional weight loss. So what that means is the patient is eating, or the person's eating regularly, and they're losing weight and they don't know why. For me as a dietitian, that sends up a huge red flag, because we need to figure out why that person is losing the weight. So again, similar to what I had said previously, what I'll do is I'll sit down with that patient and I will look at what they're eating. Perhaps at a 3-day food record they'll prepare for me, and I'll look at that. I'll assess what their needs are at this stage, nutritional needs, and then I will assess what they're taking in, and then make some recommendations. The other thing I do in this situation is work very closely, not only with the person, but with their physician as well. Because, if this goes on long term, it can cause some serious negative outcomes. So if there is a situation like this, I would certainly recommend to reach out to your healthcare provider and help them to help you set you on the right road in terms of trying to determine what's going on there.
Question number 8. To lose weight, is it better to start off with diet or exercise?
Okay, so this, weight loss and healthy weight and just overall healthy eating, I believe, incorporates not only the diet part, but also the exercise part. I can't overemphasize the importance obviously I'm a dietitian, and I want to emphasize the importance of healthy eating. But exercising is such a big part of also healthy lifestyle. I don't think there is a week or 2 weeks that goes by that there isn't some article that passes by my computer or my desk that has to do with exercise and nutrition in my patient population that I work with. It's just such a big part of good overall health. And other studies have shown, and there was a study I was just looking at in preparation for today's talk, and it was looking at a group of patients that were wanting to lose weight, and they were following them over a sort of a 1 year, 2 year, and 5 year period. And those patients that were the most successful, those ones that were eating healthy, maintaining their weight loss, doing well, had a big component of exercise in their diet. So they continued with that as well as eating. So those two are really a part and parcel in terms of, I think, healthy lifestyle.
Okay, question 9. Are there any benefits of different eating styles such as plant-based, keto, or intermittent fasting?
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. And you know what? I ended up because this is a multi-stage question. I ended up actually writing a few things down because I want to sort of touch on all those points. As long as I've been around, and as long as I can remember, diets have come and gone, and as a dietitian, I have to come and go with those with those diets as well, because it's what's in the media. It's what's causing a lot of buzz. And so I want to make sure that I am up on the information and the science behind it, and then so that I can provide the best information to the people that I work with. So let's start with plant-based. So plant-based has been around forever. So what basically plant-based means is that the person is, their diet is going to be made up of a certain percentage of plants. And that could be everything from 50%, 75% to 100% plant, which would be a vegan, right? So plant-based is, I would say, is a sister term for vegetarianism. And as you know, there's a whole myriad of vegetarian titles. So vegan being completely plant-based, so getting all your protein for plants. So that would be grains and legumes and fruits and vegetables, to something like ovo-vegetarian, where they include eggs, or a lacto-vegetarian where they include dairy. So that's the whole plant-based sort of umbrella in terms of diets. There's a lot of information, some really good information on plant-based diets. And I, over time, and you'll have seen this also with the new Canada's Food Guide, that which was, I have to say, I was very happy as a dietitian that the new food guide came out, and you can see that it embraced plants, which it was time that we, not that we can't include animal proteins in our diet. It is a part of our diet, but I think plant-based nutrition also provides a healthy component to our diet, including fiber and a lot of different sort of nutrients as well. So I think that the plant-based diet is a good alternative for people who are interested in following that. So that's the plant-based diet. So then we go into something, I would say, the complete opposite, which is, which is the keto diet. So the keto diet, again, interestingly enough, has been around for a long time. People just didn't know about it as much, possibly because of technology or lack thereof. Because years ago, and as a dietitian, we would use the keto diet for pediatrics, for children who had epilepsy. And because there were some studies that suggested that the keto diet actually decreased the amount of seizures that children had. What's happened now over time is that people have been looking at the keto diet, and researchers, scientists have looked at the keto diet in terms of managing health, particularly weight loss, and for those people who have diabetes as well. To explain the keto diet, like any diet, there's an array of how much the person follows that diet. Are they very strict, or are they sort of in between, or just sort of doing the keto diet? If you're following the keto proper, and I just wanted to make sure I have the right data here, it's very, very little carbohydrate, very, very little. So anywhere from 5 to 10% of your energy intake would be carbohydrate. Fat is the main macronutrient that's providing you energy, and it's anywhere from 65 to 80% of your calories. And then protein, it's a moderate intake, and it's about 20 to 25%. So talk about, completely opposite to the plant proteins, where carbohydrate makes a big, big part of that diet. So what happens with the keto diet, as most of you know, carbohydrates or starches are our main source of energy for our body and for our brain. And what the keto diet is doing is shifting that, and so that carbohydrates are not our source of energy, but fat and protein is. And what happens as a result is our body goes into something called ketosis, and that's when the body is breaking down the fat and the protein for our energy. So that's where the ketone diet comes from, or the keto diet. So what are the studies showing? So there have been some studies done, and on the keto diet, and they have been shown to decrease weight over time. So the question is why? So researchers are suggesting that perhaps it's because overall they're taking in less calories. So if you were following a normally balanced diet and taking in less calories and watching portion sizes, you might actually lose the same amount of weight. So that is potentially sort of one reason. The other reason might be is because, as a result, because you're watching carbohydrates or like not having them hardly at all, the carbohydrates would become mostly from very low carb veggies is where they're coming from. So perhaps they are not drinking the pops and the sodas, or eating chocolates and those kind of high calorie, low nutrition foods, which again would be giving us more calories in the long run. And so they've taken those out, and now their weight has gone down. A population where researchers have found this has been very, very helpful. Well, maybe I'll take one of the varies out. Has been helpful, the keto diet, is for those people who are morbidly obese. So the definition of morbid obesity is those people who have a BMI that is greater than 40. So for those patients, starting off their weight loss on a keto diet has shown to be quite helpful in terms of losing that initial amount of weight. And then after, and generally they would do this with the help of a dietitian and or their doctor. And then after several months of following that, then slowly increasing the carbohydrates and then continuing with that weight loss. And of course, exercise has to be a part of this as well. The downsides of the keto diet, well, there has been some studies that show that there can be over time, a deficiency in certain micronutrients, particularly the vitamin calcium, vitamin D, selenium, phosphorus. So, this diet doesn't go without risk for sure. So my recommendation all the time is that if someone is thinking that they want to go on, even like the vegetarian diet, such too, like a vegan diet, it's not just about stopping eating meat all of a sudden, because there are downsides to that as well. There is potential, and I think we're going to get to this maybe a little bit later. There's a question, and we'll talk about it more later. But there is downsides if you don't do your research before you decide to change your eating habits and your style of eating. So really important to make sure you reach out for help before you do that. Finally, fasting. So intermittent fasting, what that alludes to is not eating for certain periods of time. So for example, maybe for 8 or 10 or 12 hours, allowing your body to fast, and then eating between certain hours. So for example, maybe for 8 hours that you're going to be eating during the day. Again, I had to do some research on this because most of my patients, this is something, that we do not recommend in the kidney population. There have been some studies that show some benefit in regards to weight loss with intermittent fasting. And again, the researchers are thinking perhaps it's because the people aren't snacking. So again, it's less calories in. So, for example, you might end your fast at 6:00 p.m. and then you don't eat. You don't snack before you go to bed, and you do the majority of the eating during the day when you're active and moving. And I think common sense says that most likely you would lose weight with that. Is there a change in metabolism? The science is gray on that, but there is perhaps some research suggesting that perhaps there might be a positive effect on that. Hard to tell. So a lot of gray areas, but interesting studies. And I think this is the importance of research and just looking at these research and science and looking at these diets more carefully and trying to make the best decision for yourself in terms of your overall health.
Okay, question 10. Are there any health risks to being on a vegan or vegetarian diet?
Yes. So this is when I was answering that last question. I remembered that this question was coming up, so I didn't want to get into too much detail about it. But like I said, like any diet, there is, if it's not followed properly, there is always a risk over time. And the risk would be a micro and macronutrient deficiency. So when we're looking at the vegetarian diet, probably not as much as the vegan diet, because the vegan of course is the most restrictive, and that's where you're looking at strictly plant proteins. So one of the big issues that come up with the vegan diet is iron deficiency, because we get most of our, or not most, but we get a fair amount of iron from our meats, the heme iron, which is well absorbed by our diet. So that's something that needs to be looked at. Some vegans decide to take an iron supplement, and that is something that you can work again with your dietitian or your doctor about. B12, also in terms of veganism, B12 deficiencies is something that is a potential. So maybe doing sort of blood work and with your family doctor and seeing if that's an issue, especially in children or pregnancy or as an older adult, and these stages where macro and micronutrients are different and needs are changing. So that's important at that stage. The other in veganism is trying to get your omega-3 fatty acids. We tend to get those from our fatty fish. But you can get them from flax seeds and from walnuts and such. But again, for me, it just emphasizes the complexity of these diets and making sure that you do some pretty good research and reach out to get help when you have decided to change your way of eating.
Okay, question 11. Do you think completely removing gluten from your diet is healthy, even if someone has a gluten intolerance or celiac disease?
This is again another diet that has been around for a long time, but has in the recent years has gained a lot of popularity. I think I'm going to just go on the soapbox for a second. I think a lot of us are looking for a quick answer for our problems, whatever that problem might be, and we're reaching out. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes maybe not in the best way, and looking at diet as a solution to those problems. And this is maybe one of the areas that I have some concern about, and it's the gluten-free diet. So why I say this diet's been around for a long time is because celiac disease has been around forever. And what celiac disease is, first of all, celiac disease affects probably 1 to 2% of the total population, so very small amount. And what it is for people who have celiac disease, which now you can diagnose with a blood test, what it is the inability to tolerate, or I don't know if I could say the word allergy, but it's the inability to tolerate something called gluten. And gluten is a protein or a series, there's several proteins that are found in starches or grains, particularly in wheat, also in rye, in triticale, in oats. This is where you tend to find gluten. And when patients who have celiac disease eat gluten, what happens is their body has a negative reaction to that. Now this is taking you to biology, but if you look at our GI tract, so this is the small bowel, the large bowel, where all the absorption of our nutrients happens, there are little villi, little hairs that are that are on the surface of our GI tract. And why there are all these villi is because it increases the absorptive surface so that our body is able to absorb all these nutrients. What happens when celiac patients eat gluten, the result is that the gluten ends up flattening these villi. So the absorptive area decreases significantly, and as a result, they end up having malnutrition of certain nutrients, and they can get very sick over time. So for those patients, gluten needs to be removed. They need to be followed by a gastroenterologist. They need to be followed by a dietitian who specializes in the area of celiac disease and come up with a diet that is suitable for them to get back and to get healthy again. And they can, with this diet, they can absolutely get back on track. They can they get back and their health is regained, and they are healthy individuals that need to follow this diet. And thankfully, over the years, this is the good side about people being interested in the gluten-free diet, is the fact that there are so many products now that are gluten-free. So years ago, there were very few, and patients would have to order them online and bring them from BC and from a certain factory that made them. Now we have areas of the grocery store that are just for gluten-free products. So that is so awesome for the patient who has celiac disease. Now, what about others who what about other people and the gluten-free diet? Well, there certainly are studies that support there are some individuals who react either from an inflammatory point of view or perhaps from a autoimmune, that maybe have an autoimmune disorder, and they too might have what is called gluten sensitivities. So they perhaps can tolerate some gluten, but if it's a large amount, they might end up having some side effects because of that. Some of them are GI. They'll talk about feeling unwell, bloating, change in bowel movements. So that, or just maybe just not, feeling well overall. I think if that's the case, I think it's important to take it to your physician, and they can possibly do some blood work, or they can do some studies, some tests to see if that's the case, maybe refer you on to a gastroenterologist, and see if there is a link between gluten and the symptoms that you are experiencing. The other thing I just wanted to mention, there are also some other diseases, and again, more research being done on areas like fibromyalgia, which is a disease, and multiple sclerosis, which many of you might have heard of, and irritable bowel syndrome. There are studies looking at gluten and how they affect those diseases as well. So again, I guess what I want to get at is that I think that to go on a gluten-free diet for just the reason of going on a gluten-free diet perhaps doesn't make the best sense. It's also going to cost you more money because gluten-free products are quite expensive. But if there is sort of a cause, if there is something that you're thinking might be an issue, then I think it's worth, again, sort of reaching out to your physician, healthcare worker, and seeing if perhaps changing your diet, maybe that's including decreasing your gluten somewhat, and seeing if there is some positive outcomes from that, if that might be an option. Okay.
Okay, question 12. Is there a way where, so close, is there a way where I can eat or drink something to help me with my migraines? I do not like taking Advil or Tylenol because they don't help me at all.
Yes. Yikes. For the migraine sufferer, I'm sorry. I've had maybe a handful of migraines in my life, and they are absolutely awful. And I certainly have friends and colleagues who suffer from migraines long term, and it is just can be at times crippling. And absolutely, you want to see what are the triggers. I think that's the word that people use who suffer migraines. What are the triggers that might cause or worsen or exacerbate these migraines? This is something I had to do a little bit of research on because I don't know much about that. There are some studies, not a lot. I did find a study, a 2018 study, that looked at foods as triggers for migraines. And so what they did in this particular study, and it was a pretty well-designed study. There was, I think, there was less than 100 people, about 80 patients who suffered from migraines. And what they did is they looked at an array of foods. There was quite a few foods that they looked at. And they had the patients eat these foods, and then they would not calculate, but they would then monitor whether they had a migraine or not. And so then what they did was they looked at that data, and then it sounds a bit cruel, but then they would then ask the patients to eat these foods again and see if they could replicate that. And the studies did show in this particular study that foods did, that there were certain foods that were triggers for patients. And so some of those foods, I wrote them down. Wheat was one of them, oranges, eggs, coffee, alcohol, chocolate, milk. And that's like, there was 20 different foods. And the interesting thing was, it wasn't the same food for the 50 or 60 people. It varied. So what the researchers decided at the end of that study was that yes, food can be a migraine trigger, and that what I think the patient needs to do is maybe with those more commonly found foods that are triggers, to sort of do this, I don't know, that maybe, or think of these as possible triggers. And if, for example, so if you eat something as chocolate and then you have a migraine, and then later on you repeat that and you have a migraine again, then that might be on your list of, okay, I cannot eat chocolate. And then you sort of compose your own list of triggers. That's sort of all that I could get from the minimal amount of research that I did. Again, sort of reaching out and possibly talking to your doctor about this, especially if migraines are a big problem. And there are neurologists, so those are doctors who work in the area of the brain, and they would most likely have more information and contacts who they could refer you to in this area of nutrition.
Okay. So now the last question, the final one. Are there any foods you recommend people just stop eating completely?
The simple question to that is no. I need to put a preface to this. If you're allergic to something, so if you have a peanut allergy, then of course I would say don't eat peanuts. But I am very, very fortunate to be the mother of 3 beautiful girls,
my gosh.
Miss Endicott being one of them. And as a mother and as a dietitian, as they were growing up, I thought it was very important to expose or introduce the girls to all the different foods that are available to us, and to try different foods so that their diet was varied, whether it's in different, the different sort of food groups, whether it's, fruits or vegetables or meats, and certainly there are foods that we like and don't like, but then we would try it again. And so I think number one, that was making sure that they were not afraid to try different foods and to enjoy them for not only their taste, because eating is so wonderful, and experimenting with different types of tastes. So including those in your diet, and again having a nice variety in your diet as well. So it's not just meat and potatoes and peas and corn and that's it. So just really trying to balance that out. But then I want to also talk about those sort of foods that are maybe providing us with not so much nutrition but taste good. That area of, say, snack foods, whether they're sort of potato chips, corn chips, whether candies and those kind of foods. I'm not a believer that you should stay away from those kind of foods. But what I always I like to say is that we have control over those food versus the food having control over us. So some using techniques like, if there is one of those foods in the house, and you do like them, and maybe having a little bowl of those to enjoy those. Now some people say to me, dietitian Diana, I can't do that. I have to not have those food in the house. So then I say, well, you know yourself the best. So then you do that. But then if you're at a party and those foods are there, again, you need to know how you can deal with those foods. And I think if we can learn early of how to control and just enjoy those foods, you don't need a lot of it. Just enjoy them and include them at times in your diet, but the majority of the time eating healthy and exercising. I think it's a lifestyle. And this is how we continue our life as young adults, and then into our middle ages, and then as we get older, making sure that we are healthy and we eat nutritious, and that we exercise so that we can live long and healthy. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, YouTubers normally have a sign off, so
Oh,
we
okay.
need to say bye to them
okay.
before we just cut it. Yes, thank you so much for doing this part one. My mom realized that we needed to cut it into 2 sections, because this does take a lot of time, but I know the students will appreciate it, but I also really appreciate your knowledge and all that you
You're welcome, Miss
bring
Endicott.
to this topic. I know, isn't it weird? Both Miss Endicott. So next time, we have a video, it's going to be focused on specifically diet of athletes and questions surrounding that, and then in this time of COVID, how people are coping with their diets, as we're figuring this out ourselves too.
Right. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
See you guys.
Bye.
And thank you so much. That's so awesome.